Sarah Martinez had always known this day might come, but she never imagined it would happen like this. The morning started like any other at the downtown Veterans Clinic where she worked as a counselor. She was helping former soldiers readjust to civilian life, a job that meant everything to her. Little did she know that by noon she would be in police custody, accused of something that would shake her to her core. The trouble began when Sarah decided to grab lunch at the new cafe across from the clinic. She was wearing her usual casual clothes, jeans, a simple t-shirt, and a light jacket. What she didn't expect was to walk into the middle of a robbery investigation. 3 masked men had held up the cafe just 20 minutes before she arrived, escaping with cash and leaving behind terrified customers and staff. When Detective James Rodriguez arrived on the scene, he immediately began questioning everyone in the area. Sarah, being helpful as always, approached him to offer any assistance she could provide. She explained that she worked across the street and had seen some suspicious activity earlier that morning. However, when she rolled up her sleeve to show him her watch while explaining the timeline, Detective Rodriguez's eyes locked onto something else entirely. There, on Sarah's forearm, was a tattoo that made his blood run cold. It was a detailed military insignia, specifically the emblem of the 75th Ranger Regiment, one of the most elite units in the U.S. Army. The tattoo was expertly done, showing intricate details that only someone with intimate knowledge of the unit would know. But here was the problem. Detective Rodriguez had served in the military himself, and he knew for certain that women were not allowed in the Rangers during the time period this tattoo represented. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me," Rodriguez said, his tone suddenly shifting from friendly to suspicious. Sarah looked confused, not understanding why his demeanor had changed so dramatically. She asked what was wrong, but Rodriguez was already reaching for his handcuffs. "You're under arrest for stolen valor," he announced loudly, causing everyone in the cafe to turn and stare. Sarah's face went pale with shock. Stolen valor. The act of pretending to be a military veteran or claiming unearned military honors was not only illegal but deeply offensive to real veterans and their families. "There's been a mistake," Sarah protested, but Rodriguez wasn't listening. He had seen too many people try to claim military service they hadn't earned, and this tattoo was clearly fake in his mind. Women simply weren't Rangers. Period. The tattoo was elaborate and expensive-looking, which in his experience meant someone had gone to great lengths to create a convincing lie. As the handcuffs clicked around Sarah's wrists, she felt a mixture of humiliation and disbelief. The other customers in the cafe watched with a combination of curiosity and judgment. Some nodded approvingly, thinking justice was being served against someone who would dishonor the military. Others looked uncomfortable, sensing that something wasn't quite right about the situation. Sarah tried to explain that there had been a misunderstanding, but Rodriguez had already made up his mind. He had dealt with stolen valor cases before, and they always followed the same pattern: elaborate stories, fake documentation, and desperate attempts to maintain the lie when confronted. This woman might look innocent, but that tattoo told him everything he needed to know. The walk to the police car felt like the longest journey of Sarah's life. She had dedicated her career to helping veterans, and now she was being accused of mocking their service. The irony was crushing. As Rodriguez guided her into the back seat of his patrol car, Sarah caught a glimpse of her reflection in the window. She looked like any other criminal being taken into custody. During the ride to the police station, Rodriguez explained his reasoning. He told Sarah that he had served in the Army and knew the regulations. Women were not allowed in the 75th Ranger Regiment, especially not during the time frame her tattoo suggested. The tattoo was too detailed, too perfect, clearly the work of someone who had studied military insignia online and had it recreated by a skilled artist. Sarah listened in stunned silence, realizing that anything she said would only make her situation worse. How could she explain the truth when it seemed so impossible? The evidence against her appeared overwhelming from Detective Rodriguez's perspective. She had a tattoo representing service in a unit that didn't accept women, and she couldn't immediately prove her connection to it. At the police station, the booking process began. Sarah was fingerprinted, photographed, and processed like any other suspect. The charges were formal: violation of federal stolen valor laws, which carried serious penalties including potential jail time and hefty fines. The booking officer, Sergeant Mills, had also served in the military and shook his head disapprovingly when he saw the tattoo. "It's always disappointing to see someone dishonor the uniform like this," Mills commented as he filled out the paperwork. Sarah wanted to scream that they had it all wrong, but she knew her protests would fall on deaf ears. She was trapped in a nightmare where the truth sounded like a lie. Word of the arrest began to spread quickly through the local law enforcement community. Military veterans working in various departments heard about the case and expressed their outrage. Social media posts began appearing, with people sharing stories about the woman who had been caught with a fake Ranger tattoo. The story was gaining momentum, and Sarah was becoming the face of stolen valor in her city. As Sarah sat in the holding cell, she thought about her life and how she had ended up in this situation. She had always been proud of her military connection, but she had learned to be careful about when and how she shared her story. It was complicated, and most people didn't understand the full context when they first heard it. Now, that same story that defined her life had become the reason she was facing criminal charges. The hours passed slowly in the cell. Sarah watched as other people were brought in and processed, wondering if any of them were facing charges as serious as hers. Stolen valor wasn't just a legal issue. It was a moral one that could destroy her reputation permanently. Even if she eventually proved her innocence, the stigma might follow her for the rest of her life. Detective Rodriguez, meanwhile, was feeling satisfied with his arrest. He had received commendations for his previous stolen valor investigations, and he was confident this case would be another clear-cut victory. He began preparing his report, documenting the evidence, and building what he believed would be an airtight case against Sarah Martinez. As evening approached, Sarah was informed that she would be spending the night in jail. Her bail hearing was scheduled for the next morning, but until then, she would remain in custody. The reality of her situation was beginning to sink in fully. She was not just facing legal consequences. Her career, her reputation, and everything she had worked for was now in jeopardy. The cell was cold and uncomfortable. But Sarah's physical discomfort was nothing compared to the emotional turmoil she was experiencing. She had spent years helping other veterans overcome their struggles, and now she was being accused of betraying everything they stood for. The injustice of it was almost too much to bear. As she lay on the narrow bench in her cell, Sarah closed her eyes and tried to prepare herself for what was to come. She knew that the next day would bring new challenges, and she would need all her strength to face them. Little did she know that her salvation would come from the most unexpected source, and in a way that would change her life forever. The next morning brought chaos to the police station that nobody could have predicted. Sarah had barely slept, her mind racing with thoughts about how to prove her innocence. She was scheduled for her bail hearing in a few hours, but first, she had to endure another round of questioning from Detective Rodriguez, who remained convinced he had caught a clear case of stolen valor. What Detective Rodriguez didn't know was that his arrest had set off a chain reaction that reached far beyond the local police department. Sarah's absence from the Veterans Clinic had been noticed immediately by her colleagues, who became worried when she failed to show up for her afternoon appointments. Her supervisor, Dr. Emily Chen, had tried calling her repeatedly without success. By evening, Dr. Chen had contacted Sarah's emergency contact, her adoptive father, Robert Martinez, a retired Air Force colonel. When Robert learned about the arrest, his reaction was not what anyone would have expected. Instead of shock or disappointment, he became furious. Not at Sarah, but at the situation. He immediately began making phone calls to people he had served with, explaining what had happened and asking for help. One of those calls went to Admiral Patricia Williams, a highly decorated Navy officer who had recently retired after 35 years of service. Admiral Williams had known Robert for decades, and more importantly, she knew Sarah's story. When Robert explained the charges against his daughter, Admiral Williams felt a mix of rage and determination that she hadn't experienced since her active duty days. "This is unacceptable," Admiral Williams told Robert over the phone. "I don't care what time it is or who I have to wake up. This stops now." She hung up and immediately began making calls to contacts throughout the military and law enforcement communities. By midnight, she was in her car driving toward the police station where Sarah was being held. Meanwhile, Detective Rodriguez was at home, proud of his arrest and already planning how to present the case to prosecutors. He had dealt with stolen valor cases before, and this one seemed particularly egregious due to the quality and detail of the tattoo. He was confident that Sarah Martinez would either plea bargain or face serious consequences for her deception. What Rodriguez didn't realize was that his case was about to unravel in spectacular fashion. Admiral Williams arrived at the police station at 2 in the morning, demanding to speak with whoever was in charge. The night shift sergeant initially tried to dismiss her, but when she presented her military identification and explained her rank, attitudes quickly changed. "I need to see the woman you arrested for stolen valor," Admiral Williams stated firmly, "and I need to see her now." The sergeant explained that visiting hours were over, but Admiral Williams wasn't taking no for an answer. "Son, I've commanded aircraft carriers and led operations in 3 different theaters of war. I'm not leaving here until I see Sarah Martinez and straighten out this mess." The commotion woke Sarah from her restless sleep. She could hear voices in the hallway outside her cell, including one that sounded familiar but that she couldn't quite place. When the cell door finally opened, Sarah looked up to see a distinguished woman in her 60s wearing a Navy dress uniform covered with ribbons and decorations. "Hello, Sarah," Admiral Williams said softly. "I'm here to take you home." Sarah stared in confusion, not immediately recognizing the woman. But as Admiral Williams stepped closer, Sarah's eyes widened in recognition. It was Admiral Williams, the same officer who had been present during one of the most important days of Sarah's life. Detective Rodriguez was called in immediately when his superiors learned that a retired admiral was demanding the release of his suspect. He arrived at the station angry and defensive, certain that someone was trying to interfere with his investigation. He had worked too hard on this case to let military politics derail justice. "Detective Rodriguez," Admiral Williams said when he entered the interrogation room where Sarah was now sitting. "I understand you arrested this young woman for stolen valor based on her tattoo." Rodriguez nodded confidently, explaining his reasoning about women not being allowed in the Rangers and how the tattoo was clearly fake. Admiral Williams listened patiently, then asked to see the tattoo in question. When Sarah rolled up her sleeve, the Admiral examined it carefully, nodding as she recognized every detail. Then she turned to Detective Rodriguez with an expression that could have frozen fire. "Detective, this tattoo is not fake, and this woman is not guilty of stolen valor," Admiral Williams said with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "This tattoo represents something far more significant than you realize, and your arrest of this woman is not only wrong, but deeply insulting to everyone who has served in our military." Rodriguez bristled at being challenged. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I know military regulations. Women were not allowed in the 75th Ranger Regiment. This tattoo is impossible unless it's fake." He was standing his ground, convinced that even an admiral could be fooled by a convincing liar. Admiral Williams smiled grimly. "Detective, you're absolutely right that women weren't allowed in the Rangers, but you're making a critical assumption about what this tattoo represents and why Sarah has it. This tattoo isn't claiming that Sarah served in the Rangers. It's honoring someone who did serve, someone who died for this country, and someone whose memory Sarah has every right to carry with her." The room fell silent. Detective Rodriguez looked confused, while Sarah felt tears beginning to form in her eyes as she realized what Admiral Williams was about to reveal. The truth about her tattoo was more complicated and more painful than anyone in that room could have imagined. 15 years ago, Admiral Williams began, I was part of a joint operation in Afghanistan. During that operation, we lost one of the finest Rangers I ever had the privilege to know. Sergeant First Class Michael Torres was killed in action while saving the lives of his entire unit. He died a hero, and he was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions. Rodriguez was listening intently now, beginning to sense that this story was going somewhere he hadn't expected. Admiral Williams continued, her voice carrying the weight of memory and loss. Sergeant Torres was engaged to a young woman back home. They had planned to be married when his deployment ended. That young woman was pregnant with his child when he died. The child she was carrying was Sarah. Admiral Williams gestured toward Sarah, who was now crying quietly. The revelation hit Detective Rodriguez like a physical blow. Sarah wasn't claiming to have served in the Rangers herself. The tattoo was a tribute to her biological father, a man she had never met but whose memory she carried with her every day. Sarah's adoptive father, Colonel Robert Martinez, was Michael's commanding officer, Admiral Williams explained. When Michael died, Robert promised to take care of Michael's fiancée and unborn child. He married Sarah's mother and adopted Sarah, giving her his name and raising her as his own daughter. But Sarah has always known about her biological father and the sacrifice he made. Detective Rodriguez felt his certainty crumbling. The case he had been so proud of was falling apart, and he was beginning to realize the magnitude of his mistake. He had arrested the daughter of a Medal of Honor recipient and accused her of dishonoring the very service her father had died protecting. The tattoo, Admiral Williams continued, was Sarah's way of honoring her father's memory when she turned 18. Every detail is accurate because it was designed with the help of his former unit members who wanted to ensure it properly represented his service and sacrifice. Sarah has every right to wear that tattoo, and your accusation of stolen valor is not only wrong, but deeply hurtful to someone who has already sacrificed more for this country than most people ever will. The interrogation room was completely silent, except for the sound of Sarah's quiet sobbing. Detective Rodriguez stood frozen, realizing that he had made the worst mistake of his career. He had arrested an innocent woman and publicly humiliated the daughter of a war hero. Admiral Williams wasn't finished. Detective, Sarah has dedicated her entire adult life to helping veterans readjust to civilian life. She works at the Veterans Clinic specifically because she understands the sacrifices that military families make. She has probably done more to honor her father's memory and help other veterans than most people who actually served in the military. Rodriguez finally found his voice. I didn't know. The tattoo looked fake to me because I knew women couldn't serve in that unit. I thought I was doing the right thing. His confidence was completely gone, replaced by the dawning realization of the damage he had caused. Detective, Admiral Williams said firmly, good intentions don't excuse poor police work. You made assumptions without conducting a proper investigation. You arrested someone based on incomplete information and your own prejudices about what women can and cannot do in the military. This is exactly the kind of behavior that destroys trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve. Sarah looked up at Admiral Williams through her tears. I tried to tell him there was a mistake, but he wouldn't listen. I couldn't figure out how to explain the whole story quickly enough to stop him from arresting me. Her voice was hoarse from crying and the stress of the past day. Admiral Williams placed a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder. You shouldn't have had to explain anything, sweetheart. A proper investigation would have revealed the truth before any arrest was made. Detective Rodriguez jumped to conclusions and acted on them without doing his job properly. The implications of Detective Rodriguez's mistake were starting to become clear to everyone in the room. Not only had he arrested an innocent woman, but he had done so in a very public way that had already begun to damage her reputation. The stolen valor charges would need to be dropped immediately, but the damage to Sarah's life and career might be much harder to repair. Admiral Williams turned back to Detective Rodriguez with a look that could have stripped paint. "I want all charges against Sarah Martinez dropped immediately. I want a public apology issued to her and to the memory of her father. And I want a full investigation into how this happened so that it never happens again." Detective Rodriguez nodded numbly, knowing that his career was probably over. He had not only made a terrible mistake, but he had done so in a case involving the daughter of a Medal of Honor recipient. The political and public relations nightmare that was about to unfold would likely end his law enforcement career permanently. But Admiral Williams wasn't just thinking about justice for Sarah. She was also thinking about the broader implications of what had happened and how to ensure that Sarah's reputation was fully restored. The real work of fixing this mess was just beginning. The aftermath of Admiral Williams's intervention moved with military precision. Within 2 hours of her arrival at the police station, all charges against Sarah had been formally dropped and she was released from custody. But Admiral Williams knew that simply releasing Sarah wasn't enough. The damage to her reputation had already begun, and it would take deliberate action to repair it. Detective Rodriguez sat in his supervisor's office, facing the most difficult conversation of his career. Captain Maria Santos had been called in at 3 in the morning to deal with the crisis, and she was not happy. The department was facing a potential lawsuit, public humiliation, and the loss of trust from the veteran community they served. "Explain to me how you arrested the daughter of a Medal of Honor recipient without doing basic background checks," Captain Santos demanded. Rodriguez had no good answer. His assumption about the tattoo had seemed reasonable at the time, but now it looked like the work of an incompetent officer who rushed to judgment. Meanwhile, Admiral Williams was working her phone, calling contacts in the media, the military, and the veteran community. She understood that Sarah's vindication needed to be as public as her accusation had been. The story of her arrest was already circulating online, and without immediate action, the false narrative would become permanent. Sarah sat in Admiral Williams's rental car outside the police station, still trying to process everything that had happened. The emotional whiplash from arrest to release had left her drained, but she was gradually beginning to understand the full scope of what Admiral Williams had done for her. "How did you know to come?" Sarah asked quietly. Admiral Williams explained about the call from Robert Martinez and how the veteran community had mobilized to help her. "Your father called in every favor he had, and I was honored to be part of bringing you home." The first media interview was scheduled for later that morning. Admiral Williams had contacted a reporter from the local television station who specialized in military affairs and had a reputation for fair reporting. The story needed to be told correctly, with all the context that Detective Rodriguez had ignored. Back at the police station, Captain Santos was implementing damage control measures. Detective Rodriguez was suspended pending a full investigation, and the department's public information officer was preparing a statement. They needed to get ahead of the story before it spiraled completely out of control. The Veterans Clinic where Sarah worked had also mobilized. Dr. Emily Chen had spent the night contacting Sarah's clients and colleagues, explaining what had happened and organizing support. Many of the veterans Sarah had helped were outraged by her treatment and eager to speak on her behalf. When Sarah finally returned home, she found her adoptive father, Robert, waiting for her. The retired Air Force colonel embraced his daughter with tears in his eyes, apologizing for not being able to prevent her arrest. Sarah assured him that he had done everything possible and that Admiral Williams's intervention had saved her. The television interview took place at the Veterans Clinic, with Sarah surrounded by the people she had dedicated her life to helping. Admiral Williams sat beside her, providing both moral support and the military authority needed to give weight to Sarah's story. The reporter, Jennifer Walsh, had done her homework and understood the significance of what had occurred. "Sarah, can you tell us about your tattoo and what it means to you?" Walsh asked gently. Sarah took a deep breath and began to tell the story of her biological father, Sergeant First Class Michael Torres, and his ultimate sacrifice in Afghanistan. She spoke about growing up knowing about his heroism and wanting to honor his memory. Admiral Williams added crucial context about Michael Torres's Medal of Honor and the circumstances of his death. She also spoke about Sarah's work at the Veterans Clinic and her dedication to helping other military families. The interview painted a complete picture that contradicted everything in Detective Rodriguez's arrest report. The story aired that evening and was picked up by national news outlets within hours. The narrative quickly shifted from a stolen valor arrest to a story about police misconduct and the importance of proper investigation procedures. Social media, which had initially condemned Sarah, began rallying to her support. Detective Rodriguez watched the interview from his home, realizing that his career in law enforcement was effectively over. The veteran community that he had claimed to be protecting was now united in condemning his actions. His hasty arrest had not only hurt an innocent woman, but had also damaged the very cause he thought he was defending. The police department's investigation into the incident was swift and thorough. It revealed that Rodriguez had failed to follow proper procedures for stolen valor investigations, which required extensive background checks and verification of military records. His assumption-based policing had led to a completely avoidable crisis. Sarah returned to work at the Veterans Clinic to an outpouring of support from her clients and colleagues. Many of the veterans she had helped came forward to share their own stories about her dedication and compassion. The clinic director announced that Sarah would be receiving a commendation for her service to the veteran community. Admiral Williams extended her stay in the city to help Sarah navigate the aftermath of her ordeal. They met with lawyers to discuss potential legal action against the police department, but Sarah was hesitant to pursue litigation. She wanted to focus on moving forward rather than prolonging the conflict. Sometimes the best way to honor injustice is to use it to create positive change, Admiral Williams advised. Together, they began working on a proposal for improved police training on military affairs and stolen valor investigations. The goal was to prevent other innocent people from experiencing what Sarah had endured. The police department, facing intense public pressure and potential legal liability, was receptive to the training proposal. Captain Santos recognized that the incident had exposed serious gaps in her officers' understanding of military culture and regulations. She agreed to implement comprehensive training programs developed with input from Sarah and Admiral Williams. Detective Rodriguez submitted his resignation before the internal investigation was completed. His departure was quietly accepted by the department, which was eager to move past the embarrassment his actions had caused. He left law enforcement permanently, taking a job in private security where his military background was seen as an asset rather than a source of confusion. The broader conversation sparked by Sarah's case led to important changes in how stolen valor cases were investigated. Police departments across the country began implementing new procedures requiring thorough background checks and consultation with military liaisons before making arrests. Sarah's ordeal had created positive change that would benefit others in the future. 6 months later, Sarah was invited to speak at the annual Medal of Honor convention, where she shared her father's story and talked about the importance of supporting military families. Admiral Williams introduced her to the audience, which included many of Michael Torres's former comrades who had served with him in Afghanistan. The experience had transformed Sarah from someone who quietly honored her father's memory to an advocate for military families and proper law enforcement procedures. She began speaking at police academies and veteran organizations, sharing her story and educating others about the complexities of military service and sacrifice. Admiral Williams and Sarah developed a close friendship that extended far beyond the crisis that had brought them together. The Admiral became a mentor figure, helping Sarah navigate opportunities to expand her advocacy work and connect with other military families who had faced similar challenges. The tattoo that had once been the source of Sarah's public humiliation became a symbol of resilience and the importance of understanding before judging. Sarah never considered having it removed or covered up. Instead, she wore it proudly as a reminder of her father's sacrifice and her own journey through injustice to advocacy. The Veterans Clinic where Sarah worked received increased funding and recognition as a result of the publicity surrounding her case. The positive attention helped them expand their programs and reach more veterans in need of support. Sarah's personal trauma had inadvertently created benefits for the entire veteran community. Detective Rodriguez's former colleagues learned important lessons from his downfall. The police department's culture began to shift toward more thorough investigations and less assumption-based enforcement. Officers were trained to ask questions first and make arrests only after gathering complete information. Years later, Sarah would look back on her arrest as a turning point that led to her most meaningful work. The injustice she experienced had given her a platform to advocate for others and create positive change. While she would never forget the trauma of those 24 hours in jail, she had transformed that experience into something beneficial for countless others. Admiral Williams often reflected on how a single phone call had led to one of her most important post-retirement missions. Her intervention in Sarah's case had not only saved an innocent woman, but had also sparked reforms that improved justice for everyone. The military principle of leaving no one behind had guided her actions and created lasting positive change. The story of Sarah Martinez became a teaching case in police academies and military ethics courses across the country. It demonstrated the importance of thorough investigation, the dangers of assumption-based policing, and the power of community support in overcoming injustice. Most importantly, it showed how one person's courage to stand up for what is right can create ripple effects that benefit society as a whole. Sarah's tattoo remained exactly as it had always been, a detailed tribute to a father she never knew, but whose legacy lived on through her work. The difference was that now everyone who saw it understood its true meaning and the story of courage, sacrifice, and justice that it represented. The tattoo that had once marked her as a suspected criminal had become a symbol of honor, resilience, and the triumph of truth over prejudice.